Thank you for joining us here tonight. My name is Steve Cohen. I'm Director of the Earth Institute's research program on sustainability policy and management, and a professor of practice at the School of International Public Affairs, all here at Columbia University. I also founded and direct Columbia's MPA in Environmental Science and Policy and our MS in Sustainability Management, two master's programs that are designed to produce the sustainability professionals we so desperately need. I'm really pleased to welcome you to our event tonight, Social Value Investing, the Success of Cross-Sector Partnerships. Our co-hosts for tonight's event are my friends and colleagues, Howard W. Buffett and William B. Eimicke. They recently embarked on an exciting new emerging area of public policy. And so let's all congratulate them right now on their new book, Social Value Investing, a Management Framework for Effective Partnerships. And I'm told the authors have given out copies to everybody in the room, so there'll be a quiz at the end of the day. The book's major contribution to the literature of public administration is its effort to analyze and understand the dynamics of cross-sector collaboration and partnerships. The book is really wonderful. I reviewed it for the Public Administration Review recently. It has wonderful case studies and insightful analyses, some of which you'll be hearing about tonight from the panel. The authors work to develop a really very granular field-level understanding of the elements that lead to successful multi-sectoral partnerships. And we're in a world that really needs partnerships and collaboration as opposed to walls. Despite the current political orthodoxy that sees government and the private sector as if they were alternate universes, America's agricultural, energy, transportation, and industrial systems were all built on partnerships. And most of the political controversy surrounding these partnerships stem from a fear that the public sector is handing over public assets to the private sector to enable private gain. But there's ways to avoid that kind of fate. I study interorganizational partnerships in my own research and with my colleagues in the research program on sustainability policy and management. Most of our work is focused on incorporating the physical dimensions of environmental sustainability into routine organizational management and hastening the adoption of supportive policy. And public-private partnerships are key to sustainability and for the creation of a circular economy. I'm really fortunate that I have both Howard and Bill on the advisory board for our research program, and of course would welcome the help of anybody here in the audience that wants to help us to build a more sustainable world. Howard and Bill's book has provided us with a realistic, fact-based, and well-organized guide to understanding partnerships across sectors. Social value investment makes an important contribution to what I hope and trust will be a growing literature on interorganizational relations across the public and private sectors. And I'm really looking forward to tonight's discussion of the book. So I want to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Howard W. Buffett. He works alongside me and the faculty at the School of International Public Affairs. He also chairs the advisory board for the research program that has organized this event tonight. He's an accomplished public servant, public intellectual, and thought leader, and someone who we'll be hearing from for many, many years, and we'll all be looking forward to it. Howard, please come up.
Well, Steve, I appreciate those remarks and your generosity both in what you say and for hosting us tonight. And good evening, everybody. I have about 60 minutes of remarks. 6 minutes of remarks to welcome you here and to have a conversation, not just about the book, Social Value Investing, but also about the importance of partnerships and what partnerships can do to improve all aspects of our economy. Now, one wonderful thing about hosting an event is that everyone you would ever want to thank or acknowledge is all in one room together. And so I don't have time to go through the full list tonight, but I do want to say how critical of a role that Columbia University Press played in the publication of our book. The University Press, if you're not familiar with it, please get familiar with the University Press, because they are just such an important aspect of both our academic life and of society at large. And so I want to thank all of the work, Stephen, Jennifer, Eric. There was a whole crew there that literally the book would not have been possible if it hadn't been for their support, and it's sometimes coddling, I think they may describe it as. Also, the Earth Institute. We have the senior leadership of the Earth Institute. We have fellow board members who are here, all of the staff and the team, Allison, Kelsey, and many others who I'm sure a lot of you heard from as we were organizing the event. This would not have happened, and of course we wouldn't have this beautiful space to be getting together in tonight if it weren't for them as well. Now, I do have to give one special shout out, as you may guess. Writing a book is not an easy thing to do, quite laborious at times, and if it weren't for the support, energy, and commitment of my wife in this process, well, the book would be about a half as long as it is right now. So without her support, it would never have happened. So I say thank you to her as well. Yes, please. Trust me, she deserves it. Now, it really is a special thing for me to have so many friends, even former classmates and colleagues and mentors here gathered together. One thing for me is that if you can't tell, I usually get very excited when I'm on campus. It gives me a lot of energy. And the last few semesters of teaching at Columbia have been really remarkable. So first I wanted to ask, do we have any students who are in the room tonight? No. Wow. Fantastic. Well, I asked that question because you are the reason why Bill and I decided to write this book. You and all of the students who will come after you as well. It's because we believe the world can be a much better place than it is today. And you are going to play a critical role in making that happen. But we also know it can be easy to lose optimism and hope, to forget that every problem has a solution. Some people say we live in what they call chaotic times, that we're constantly bombarded by challenges that we don't know what to do about. This starts at the individual level. Maybe we worry about getting good grades or graduating, getting or keeping a job, whether our own children will go to a wonderful school like Columbia University. Or it could be more simple. Will we get home safely tonight? Will we have a meal to eat? And then we have the really big picture things, the things that we don't even know if we can solve, let alone how. Climate, poverty, inequality, food security, healthcare, gender and racial discrimination, political stagnation, and the list goes on. Sometimes we get into a bit of paralysis. We can find it that it's easier to just not think about these things, especially because we don't know what we can do. However, even though many of the world's challenges may not be solved in our lifetimes, I can promise you one thing: they can be solved. This is part of why Bill and I decided to write a book. Not only did we want to put forward an optimistic view of how things can continue to change for the better, but we wanted to provide a framework for taking action and to present stories about how different approaches to making the world a better place are already making a difference and succeeding. Now, you're going to hear some of those stories tonight, along with some really great commentary from an impressive group of folks who I'm honored to say I shared this stage with. But one quick personal anecdote before I turn this over to Bill. For me, the journey of this book has been a long one. It started many years ago, in earnest on June 26th of 2006. If you're a student of mine, you know why that date's important. It's when my grandfather, Warren Buffett, announced that he would be leaving all of his wealth, almost all of his wealth, to improve the world. It was a moment when he illustrated that he would measure success not by how much money he made, but by how much money he gave away. Now, just a few days after that announcement, I moved to New York City because I had the opportunity to follow in his footsteps about 50 years after he did and attend Columbia University. And believe it or not, my very first semester, Monday night class, I had a professor named Bill Eimicke. While he quickly became one of my favorite people on campus, as I'm sure he is with most of you, our relationship had a rocky beginning. So I dug out of the archives here to share with you our very first communication between me and Bill, and it went something like this. Dear Professor Eimicke, I attend your Monday class, but was informed by your other course section that you hold a low opinion of Nebraska. It's difficult to hear, I know. The message went on, but needless to say, it was the beginning of a wonderful friendship. Working with Bill, teaching, writing, and on a whole host of other projects has taught me the true meaning of the word partnership. And I think that you're lucky to have him moderate the panel tonight. We have a really incredible set of panelists who will be up here to share about their work and partnerships, and hopefully to answer your questions as the evening wraps up. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill, and I'm going to be back up here a little bit later in the program. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, good evening again. You're going to have to get a little bit more raucous here. My classes are never this quiet. So welcome again. We're so happy to have you here. And most excitingly about tonight is the experts we have here. So the book, I think, we're proud of it. It's got a lot of great things in it. But what's exciting to me is that the people who helped shape the book, the people who we look to for advice and as role models, and can-do people who are making the principles of the book a reality already in the world are here with us tonight. You all received their bios, and if I were to read each one of their bios, plus add my personal affections and knowledge of each one of them, then we'd be going home and you could get your free books. But you're going to have to wait and hear some more wisdom before that. But let me just take you across the room, and you can take out your sheet and see Regina Esteves, who is the person who more than likely traveled the longest to get here. She came here all the way from Brazil, literally, to come to this event, and I'm always grateful for her for that. But Chapter 9 is all about what she and her colleagues have accomplished in Brazil during one of the most difficult times in Brazil's history. And those of you who have read a little bit about it know that Brazil has been going through a lot of problems. And the organization that Regina co-founded, in the midst of chaos, has been reforming local governments in cross-sector partnerships all across Brazil, starting with some small cities and building up, and this year they're working with São Paulo, which is the largest city in the Americas. So it's an amazing story, and it would have only happened because of her. So she's with us.
Obrigada.
Josette Sheeran, who is on the back cover of the book, so that you know how important she is to us. She is the 7th president and CEO of the Asia Society, which was founded by the last generation of great philanthropists, John Rockefeller, one of the Rockefeller family. And she's also simultaneously, if that weren't enough, she's also the UN Special Envoy to Haiti. She's held major positions in the World Economic Forum and the United Nations Food World Program. She's also been a diplomat and a negotiator. So her career is beyond belief. So thank you, Josette, for being with us. And one of my closest friends, and Esther and I go back a long time, and we didn't always get along.
True.
Which is because we both have strong opinions, and we both know, both of us, that we're always right. So clearly, every once in a while, one of us must have been wrong, and we figured that out over time, and we've become really close friends. Ester is probably, in my view, the best mix of academic achievement and brains, and somebody who's willing to get out in the real world and mix it up. And you'll see from her bio, her academic achievements are beyond compare, but for me, what really struck me about her is I think she was literally the first public figure to say Mike Bloomberg would be a good mayor. At a time, for those of you who are not from here, nobody thought he had a chance, and no one thought he would be good. And Ester was out there saying, you guys don't get it. This guy would be great. And she was right. And then she put her money where her mouth was. She sat right next to him at City Hall while all the great innovations that we chronicle in the book were happening. So, Esther, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for everything. And I think most of you, being the kind of audience that you are, you know who Matt Bishop is. For many of us, he is the economist and has been for a long time. But believe it or not, he's not there anymore. He's at the Rockefeller Foundation. And he's working on the kinds of issues that we're talking about today. And I was saying to him when we were getting mic'd up, I'm certain that all the criticisms of the book while we were in process were his. And as I said to him, I got so mad, and then when I read it, I realized he was entirely right. So thank you not only for all the work you've done and are doing, but thank you for helping make the book so much better. So, Matt Bishop. So that's the crew, and the program is this. I'm going to ask each one of our panelists a question, and hopefully they'll decide to answer it. If not, they can answer whatever they want to say. Then we'll have a question that I'll ask all of them to respond to. Hopefully we'll have time. We'll do one more round, and then we're going to open it up. Howard's going to come back up, and we'll open it up to you folks, and we'll let you have the rest of the evening to enjoy each other. So since you came the furthest, I'm going to start with Regina. And my question to you is, why did you think a cross-sector partnership in a place that's so governmental as Brazil? What made you think something like this could work?
My name is Regina. I am CEO of Comunitas. I'm from Brazil. It's a non-profit Brazilian organization. I am so happy to be here. Pleasure to be here. Thanks so much, Bill and Howard. Well, Comunitas is a non-profit organization. Our mission is to build cross-sectoral collaborations for the sustainable development of Brazil. Our programs are focused on building capacity, knowledge, and solutions to promote Brazilian sustainable development. To do that, we focus on making cities a better place for citizens. In 2013, Comunitas created the Juntos program with the goal of establishing a network of leaders and companies and business with a deep commitment to social responsibility and a primary objective of generation more efficiency in social, corporate, and individual investments. To achieve that, you designed a shared governance model. Juntos governance represents the collaboration of sectors working together for the improvement of the public management. It brings together business leaders, civil society, and public managers, all with the same agenda: improve the public services and the capacity of the public management to promote sustainable economic development. On our governance board, there are leaders of some of the largest and most successful private companies in Brazil. Good government is not only an issue of corporate social responsibility for them. It is essential for the future of their business and the long-term viability of our country. How they have the resource, connections, experience, stature, and commitment to initiate the partnership necessary to get the work done. City governments are interested in working with us because they need help, and they do not have investment capacity to hire the best consultants, for example, and technology to help them improve. They also appreciate the halo effect of working with the best private companies and consultants in the country. Juntos now has an online platform. It's called Rede Juntos, that enables us to make the citizens and the public servants activity participants in all the projects we do. Brazil has 5,570 municipalities face similar challenges, but the foremost of these is fiscal imbalance. We believe that this chronic fiscal instability is at the root of many of problems facing Brazilian cities. Because of that, we begin each project with a complete analysis of the chosen city's financials and build our plans around balancing the books and enabling the city to plan medium and long-term objectives. Juntos can check the social value investment box of process, people, place, portfolio, and performance. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Josette, building on that, you've experienced partnerships both at the Asia Society and a lot at the UN. What, in your experience, comes out as the recipe for successful partnerships, and what are some typical things that go wrong, and how do you deal with them?
Well, Bill, thank you, and Howard. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to be on the back cover of this book. I will tell you what I've been thinking about and reflecting on for this event is that we're really in a new era. And I was just talking to Amir Dassel's son, who's here, and a good friend of the family. And I remember when I worked at the State Department as the head of UN Reform, and we were trying to get 2 paragraphs in a UN report about partnerships with the private sector. And it was like the end of the world. That was 2006. I went to the UN to head up the UN World Food Program, which is based in Rome. It's considered one of the most successful UN programs, one of the most business-like, best run, and it has to deliver billions of meals a year to the front lines of disaster and war. So I'm going to bring you into a dilemma that happened there very soon after I arrived. I wrote the cover to a Lancet series that said, if a child doesn't get proper nutrition from conception to 2 years old, their brain can be stunted for life. And so I'll just hold this up because this haunted me at the time. So this brain chart done by Chilean scientists that shows the brain of a child as cross-section who was malnourished in that period, and it will never correct. And I called that at the time the burden of knowledge. The World Food Program only checked kilocalories at the time for the over 100 million people we were the sole supply of food for. We never checked micronutrients. And so I went and asked to meet our nutrition team. There was 1.5 people for over 1 billion interventions around the world that did nutrition. And there was no knowledge of what nutritional content was in our food. And to me, the urgency of making sure that the young children in Darfur or in Afghanistan had the protection for their brains was very important. We had to call in such a cross-section of experts to help us figure out how to do that and what to do. And I will just show you a little package we started making our own food. It's called Wawa Mum. It's a chickpea paste that has all the vitamins to protect a child's brain. You can drop it out of helicopters. You don't have to add water. You tear it off. It tastes great, like a sweet hummus. And we developed this with Pakistan scientists, Indian scientists, a whole consortium of people because it didn't exist in the world. And our first airlift was going into Myanmar after Cyclone Nargis, and the packages all leaked in the plane, and the oil separated from the food. And I remember going up to Paul Pullman of Unilever and literally crying. I said, Paul, I'm so upset. We have these little packages, they protect the kids' brains, and we worked so hard on it, and the oil separated and it leaked. And he said, that's easy. Do you want our packaging team? And I said, oh my God, you're like an angel from heaven. Can I have your packaging team? And they solved this in a moment. Another company solved the solubility, like how you keep the fats separating from the proteins. I got massive reaction internally. Like, well, these are for-profit companies. How could you work with them? I'm like, do you realize the expertise they have in packaging and all of this? I will say, I think we're in a new era. We've gone past the moment, and seeing my good friend who's worked on the front lines of agriculture, this moment where, you know, we didn't realize we could tap into the expertise wherever it was, and the finance, which is something that we've been working on in Haiti. How do you bring private finance to bear? Because aid money is very limited, and I think we're seeing the end of traditional aid. And so I was just saying to Howie, I've now gone through this book for the second time. Of that era that was introduced, really I felt we were living through it at the time of all these big partnerships to get big new ideas done. There was no framework. I mean, I hate to say we were winging it, but we were creating the process of how do international institutions and the private sector and governments and aid agencies and local governments and villages, people actually care, like, what is this? And is it made from products we know and understand? And where is it grown? And, you know, how is it produced? All of those partnerships to have a successful launch, there's no roadmap. You know, you have to do it kind of hand by hand, and it's like, wow, you've written the roadmap on how these partnerships can work. You've provided a guide for the world. You've provided a framework to measure success. What does that look like? And I think in the conclusion, the principles that have to be activated, absolutely, they're 100% right on. These are the principles that need to happen. I will resist opening the book and reading them to you all. But so it's a really valuable edition. It's providing a framework for all of those in the world who, to succeed, you have to do this now. It is not a question that you can just go with traditional approaches to aid or governments trying to do it alone. I love Brazil. Brazil's been very creative. I love the work you've done. And, you know, those people who are aspirational in the world deserve us bringing the best. The last thought I'll just say, you know, WFP had billions of dollars of food and products under management in war zones around the world. It was all in pieces of paper. There was no barcoding on like expiration dates or where things were and how they moved. And I said, you know, I'm calling up the head of Walmart. I want to talk to companies that have paid gazillions of dollars to develop technology for profit. That's great, I don't mind. But I want them to allow us to have the best technologies and ideas for the poorest of the poor to benefit those who would never be able to participate in that. And again, just a huge reaction, like how, you know, what? You can't deal with. And, you know, today this methodology is really powerful. So I think the idea that, you know, the private sector has learned a lot and can help make those who are out there trying to make things work really in the most vulnerable areas of the world. Why not tap the best ideas? Why not bring them into the partnership? And why not access these great technologies developed, yes, maybe to look at food supply chains in the for-profit world, but to help us improve what we're doing and make it more effective for the poorest of the poor and the most vulnerable in the world, around the world. So, very important book, and I'm honored to be here.
Thank you, thank you. One of the things we spend a lot of time talking about in the book, because I think it deserves a lot of time, is leadership. And Esther, at the end, maybe you could tell us all if Mike is really going to think about running for president in 2020, which would make my daughter very happy. But you were there, sitting right next to him. I would say if we could go back in a time machine, one of the reasons why people thought that Bloomberg wouldn't work as mayor is New York City has this historic reputation of being huge bureaucracy, dominated by unions, and if not unions, powerful advocates and community groups. And there was no way that you were going to bring together innovative partnerships with the private sector. And yet, a good part of the book is filled with the Central Parks Conservancy and the High Line and preventive fire inspections and CompStat and A Million Trees and City Bike and the development on Roosevelt Island, on and on and on of public-private. How did he do it? And can somebody else do it? Or was that just is he a unique person and that was a unique point in time?
So this is a really important question, and I think this is an important event tonight, and I too want to congratulate you, Bill and Howard, on this book. From simply a teaching point of view, we've been talking about public-private partnerships for a while, but the literature out there is sparse and mediocre at best, and so this is an extraordinary contribution, and it is really going to be helpful in graduate schools all over the world, I think. So, I'm delighted to be here tonight to talk about this and to shed a little light on the Bloomberg administration, too, both from my academic and personal perspective of being there. First, I guess I want to say that innovation and the types of partnerships that you and Howard talk about in the book are the hallmarks of Michael Bloomberg's administration. That is correct. I think we had contracting out in government, but the concept of partnership was really very limited. The Central Park Conservancy was there, but it was viewed much more as a contract than as a partner. And in a partnership, as you all point out, that means there's constant communication and listening across different sectors, which is partly what Mike did. How did he do it? And I just want to make 2 points. First of all, when you say, oh, rich businessman, well, there's lots of rich businessmen who run for higher office and they don't win, and we're lucky that they don't win. So
And sometimes we're not so lucky.
and that's sometimes we're not so lucky. Oh, I wanted to not think about that. But in this instance, New York was extraordinarily lucky, actually, because he did and he does have the skills and the temperament to be an executive in the public sector, which is different in many ways. And the one thing that I realized when I first met him that made me excited about his campaign wasn't that he had all this money, but that he was going to actually fund his own campaign. And the New Yorkers in the room will understand how significant that was, because it insulated him from the traditional interest group politics of New York City, which are brutal in every way that you can imagine. And so one of the extraordinary things after he won, and the two huge interests in New York are real estate developers and unions. And they do have disproportionate impact because they donate money and they work in campaigns. And like almost the first day that we were in this crazy bullpen that he had created, the real estate community was at their wits' end because they were calling. I mean, they were calling everybody who was sitting in that room, and you could see because you were sitting in the room. And they were even calling me, and I'm clearly, not from that world, trying to get access to Mike Bloomberg, who had no interest in taking their call at all because he didn't have to. So he could start from a different place and create his partnerships, which he did extensively, with a different set of interests because of not really having anybody who had disproportionate influence, frankly, when he started. He had, as I said, extraordinary management skills, and it was reflected in his business, which from the beginning was high risk and using technology to innovate. And he brought that directly into government. And, even on the campaign, and people talk about 311, which is one of your case studies and something that governments are replicating all over the country. I was on that campaign, and he was talking about, customers and how do you access city government if you have a problem? Who do you call? And I literally brought him the phone book then, which was a while ago, and some of you, might remember the green
book.
Green pages zillions of phone numbers. And I said, well, you know, you have to figure out who to call, and then once you do that, you get them on the phone maybe, and then they tell you it's another agency that's responsible. So, you know, the level of satisfaction that the public would have in trying to access government was very close to zero. That was one of his first initiatives when he got elected. He really wanted to change that. And the way he did was not simply cosmetic, which is very important. It was deep into the, not just using technology, but ensuring that each agency would be responsible and there would be accountability. And I think that that was a really important example. Importantly, I want to add one thing. He also valued government's role in ensuring that the public is represented in issues of public concern, and understood the importance that government be effective and that government have capacity. Because in so many instances, government is a junior partner because government can't really do anything very well. And over time, that really has gotten worse and worse in many places. And one of the reasons I went into that administration and really respected him is he actually respected government. He knew there was a role for government. He just wanted, in many ways, like your story about the UN, he just wanted it to be done better, just like what you did. So it wasn't like he wanted to abdicate a role of government to business or to philanthropy. He wanted government to do their job better and be a better partner, and he understood that that required creating capacity in government operations. Because you can't have oversight if you don't understand what your contractor is doing. And that became exceedingly problematic for governments, not just local governments, but governments all across the country. And so I would just say that to make government an effective partner, he brought in people from every sector. And so you had business folks like Dan Doctoroff in the administration, and you had people like me who weren't supposed to be there at all. Like, I actually remember when he won, and he asked me to come in, and I said, but what will I do? Having taught my whole life, essentially. And he looked at me and he said, you will bring new ideas into government, and you will do that. And you will get it done. Because with Michael Bloomberg, if you didn't get it done, there was really no place for you. And I realized, this is an opportunity for me, obviously, but he meant it. And so it was open to all the sectors for this kind of innovation that you're talking about in the book, and for the kinds of partnerships that we'll talk more about later, I know. I want to tell one quick story, because you really reminded me of something important about the role of business and partnerships. Some of you may remember that Michael Bloomberg took office right after September 11th. And here we are now, and many people have no recollection of the situation that the city was really in at that point. And that the Federal Reserve of the United States wrote a report telling the financial service sector to decentralize and move out of New York City, which frankly would have been one of the worst things to happen to New York at that point in time because of the need for jobs and the tax base. And basically, people were scared. They were, and businesses were scared to open up in New York. And they needed a government that was reliable and responsible, and that they too could count on. So partnerships goes both ways. And I remember sitting in that bullpen, and I could hear, because everybody could hear everything, him on the phone calling every major business person and minor ones in the city saying, no, you can't leave New York now. No, don't leave New York now. And his moniker at that time was, New York's open for business. And the public sector stepped up. And that is an important part of partnership, where government actually plays a role in ensuring that business can do business. And I think you get at that in the book too. We don't always talk about it from both perspectives. And I believe that that's where the leadership was. So that to me was where he was unique and he was different. And we in New York, I believe, were fortunate to have him as mayor at that point in time.
Thank you, Esther. Matthew, thank you for waiting. And since he who is last shall be first, I want to ask you two questions at the same time, and you can take them in either order you want. Because from reading you for so long, I think particularly now, you have a great perspective on this. The two things that I think are at the forefront now, and maybe you can help us all understand how different it is or not, and how much of a difference it will make. So one is the role of philanthropy as a catalyst in these partnerships. Is it bigger now than it's ever been? How much can they lead, even if they're smaller as compared to government? So the role of philanthropy as a catalyst. And then the second, where you've done so much work and where we try to do a little bit, is on measurement. And if we're really going to make this field of social impact, or whatever you want to call it, social value, social impact, social entrepreneurship, Peter Drucker said it time and time again, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So where are we on that front? Either order, you decide.
Well, thank you. Yeah, small challenge there to two mega questions. But first of all, I just wanted to congratulate you and Howie on the book, because it really is a great contribution. And particularly, I've known Howie, I guess, about 10 or 12 years now. And he's always been a fairly fearless writer. I remember one occasion I met him in Washington, and he was saying, yeah, I'm thinking of writing to my grandfather to urge him to take account of social and environmental impact in his investing strategies. And I was just imagining, I could just imagine, I don't know whether the letter was ever sent, let alone how he responded, presumably with some droll put down that now young grandson, when you're my age, you can tell me how to invest or something like that. But anyway, and this book is sort of, it goes to the tough issues and so forth, and so it's highly recommended. The first time we met actually was at a conference that I had helped arrange in the spring of 2007 as a way to get some free research done on a book I was working on at the time with my co-author Michael Green, which was called Philanthrocapitalism, which we initially published more or less 10 years ago to the day with the subtitle How the Rich Can Save the World, which turned out to be about as bad timing as you could possibly do for a book on philanthropy and the positive role of the rich. And because at that point, capitalism had collapsed, and everyone kept coming up to me and saying, that was a great book. Why didn't you publish it 6 months ago or a year ago? It would have done well then. And it's interesting to me that philanthrocapitalism is now getting a second sort of airing, as it's being criticized widely by this new book, Winners Take All, which is really trying to brand philanthropy and the efforts of business and so forth to engage in constructive ways with changing the world as an elite charade, basically putting lipstick on a pig. And I think this is a very dangerous book, and I'm kind of shocked that the whole doing good part of the global elite, or indeed the whole community that is engaged in partnerships has not actually sort of fought back a bit against this book, because it is a counsel of despair at the very moment where actually we need people to step up to the plate and make partnerships and philanthropic intervention, and businesses that actually do care about improving the world actually deliver at a larger scale than they've been doing already, rather than give up on the whole exercise, which seems to be the counsel of this new book. But one of the things in researching philanthrocapitalism, I mean, it became essentially a book about partnerships, because it became very clear that as you talk to all this new generation of philanthropists that were emerging, the ones that thought about it properly, and that was by no means the majority of them, but the really smart ones, had very quickly become aware that even if you were the richest person on earth, even if you're Jeff Bezos, you cannot solve any meaningful problem on your own. I remember talking to Bill Gates and saying, you know, people are saying to me, you know, you're creating this foundation like gives away $4 billion a year, and it's just dominating the philanthropy world, and it's like Microsoft in the philanthropy world. It's like an evil monopoly. And he just turned to me and said, you know, that's one of the stupidest questions anyone's ever asked me. We are a tiny, tiny organization in the scheme of things. We can only succeed if we find partners and we help find movements that want to achieve the kinds of things that we're trying to do in the world. And so, you know, at heart, this partnership idea is really only, it is the key, the only way we are going to solve the big challenges that the world faces. And I think, you know, philanthropy, we argued in that book, and I would stick by it in today, is that philanthropy can play a catalytic role because the kind of capital that wealthy people have, you know, is not constrained in the way that most other forms of money in our system are. Like if you're in politics, if you're in government, you're terribly worried about getting re-elected. If we're certainly a democratic government, you know, you're worried about getting re-elected, so there's all sorts of things that you can't do because they're either too risky or they're not going to pay off in time for your election to come around, and so you neglect those things. If you're in a regular charity, you're so preoccupied often with fundraising that you don't really get time to make risky bets. And if you're in business, again, typically, I mean, now we're seeing impact investing emerge a bit, so you're starting to see companies that do have mission at the heart of their identity, but still it's quite hard to get your shareholders to back you doing things that are fundamentally about improving the world. And so philanthropy, in theory, can find ways to kind of catalyze and take some of the risks that maybe governments or businesses can't afford to take, and because they're too constrained. I think in practice, philanthropy has done very little of that and is still, you know, by and large, not really thinking through and taking the big risk that it should be taking. I also think that, you know, money is not everything, actually, and that partly what I'm doing in my new role that I left The Economist for is I run the Bellagio Center for the Rockefeller Foundation, which is a place that was given to bring people together, to get them to spend time together thinking about how actually do you do things better to change the world. And actually there are a lot of problems, I think, that if we could just get the right people in the room and actually get them to think through how they could cooperate better, collaborate better, we would make a lot more progress. So, you know, I do think getting partnerships right is a massive challenge. And we're all saying it, you know, the rhetoric has now moved to this point where people just routinely say partnership, this, partnership, that. But actually doing it right is really, really hard. There's, you know, you come from a different sector, you speak a different language. Often many partnerships fail at the basic communication level. You know, you find people, you know, everyone kind of thinks that what they bring is the smart perception of the world, and maybe there isn't a recognition of what else people bring to the table. So a lot of people in government look at business and say, well, business can give us the money, but they don't really actually value some of the innate skill sets that businesses have. And, you know, I think a lot of people in business look at the non-profit sector and think, well, they're not very well paid, they must all be a bunch of losers, which is not a very good starting point for a constructive partnership. And these things are sort of out there, and they remain deeply problematic. And I think, you know, the number of really successful partnerships, you know, is still very, very small. That brings us to the second question, which is around measurement. I think part of the real curse of the whole social change sector is that compared to the business world, we don't have agreed measurements on, you know, on what's working and what isn't, and that makes it really, really hard to judge whether things are going well or not, and to judge whether a partnership is working, or to judge whether any philanthropic intervention or social change movement is really working. And there are really two schools of thought on this. One is that, you know, the problems are just so inherently difficult around measuring, and we actually all disagree wildly on what's good and what isn't, and therefore you'll never crack this problem. And there's another school of thought which I subscribe to, and which I think Howie and Bill, you subscribe to, which is this is a great challenge of our age, and one that there's no in principle reasons why we can't solve it, and that we need to prioritize it. And in pretty much the same way as in the middle of the 20th century after the 29 crash and the Great Depression, a huge initiative globally around the world was launched around measuring GDP, understanding how economies worked, understanding the financial analysis of companies.
Generally accepted accounting principles.
All that. And it took 30 years or so to get to where it got to. And obviously GDP has its limitations, as we're all becoming painfully aware nowadays, but it was a vast improvement in how the economy worked. And people won Nobel Prizes for that work and so forth. And it just changed, really, it led to a step change in quality in the management of developed countries, in particular in the 20th century. I think we could achieve that in the social, in measuring society better and measuring social progress and social value creation. And the kind of framework that you've laid out in this book is part of that solution. And I think it's very important that people take it up and figure out how we actually implement it in practice, because if we can start to embed these ideas in the way people in making investment decisions in the public sector operate, in the way philanthropists operate, in the way the media reports on the activities of philanthropy. Imagine if you moved from reporting on the size of the check by a philanthropist to the size of the social value creation and their social investment rate of return. That would be like a huge improvement in how resources get allocated and how we actually accelerate social progress. So I think this book has taken on really two very, very important challenges of our day and given us some really constructive ways forward.
Thank you. Well, rather than me dominate the discussion, I'm going to ask Howard to come back up here and give you guys a chance to ask your questions of this august panel.
So if anyone does have questions, you're invited to line up at the mic. The real reason that I'm here is Bill is unwilling to cut people off if they're giving speeches or their autobiographies. And so they wanted me to come up and help kind of policing. So we have two microphones. And the great news is if there are no questions, we have additional questions for the panelists that we're going to ask. So this is an opportunity to chime in. No pressure. If anyone wants to, we may have one. Nope, he's going to the restroom. So, no, good. Okay, good. So yes, sir, please.
Yeah. Thank you all for being here. And I just wanted to ask a question. So Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, the Gulf area in general, has been massively shifting towards the idea of PPPs, right? Private and public partnerships. And especially since the oil crisis in 2014, this has been a massive thing. How do we actually get the private sector involved in the investments that we need? And I think there's a lot of money behind it, a lot of excitement behind it. A lot of ministers, there isn't a single minister that doesn't have at least 5 multi-million-dollar PPPs on the table since 2014, right? And the idea is that these are great in theory, but from some of the examples that have actually been implemented, it hasn't worked out so well, especially when the private sector is looking at the end of the day at the bottom line of whatever investment he's made in this, as well as the public sector was actually trying to make sure that the policies and the reforms that are being implemented are actually have some oversight by the public sector to make sure that the public is benefiting. And especially when there's a cultural class, and I think Brazil would be a very interesting example to learn from. How do you get that international, Western developed expertise actually involved with you? And then how do you get different local communities involved when there's different, maybe cultural clashes, even on a local level for these kind of things?
Great. So I'll turn it to the panel. I will say I do have a book to recommend for you. It's called Social Value Investing. No. But yeah, please, who would like to take on? Josette.
Maybe if I could jump in just on specifically the example of Saudi Arabia. I've been there probably 3 times this year. I'll go back at the end of October. I think it's so fascinating, the transition that's happening there in Plan 2030, where it's really looking at how do you activate all the different sectors of the economy. I will say it's the only government on earth I've seen, and I haven't looked at everyone, where if you go on the websites of the different ministries, it says how to measure whether we're succeeding. And it's like right there, all these measurements. And I thought, wow, they've really gotten this piece of it and are being very transparent about the goals and all of that. I think, one thing that's different to me today from the public-private partnerships of the late 80s and 90s, which to me felt a little bit mainframe computer-ish, is the ones I've seen today that are really successful need a new name. The social value proposition piece gets more at that. But where it's not just about business and government saying, let's create a new food industry, or let's do this, or let's do that, but this art form of tapping the best minds. And sometimes you need the poets next to the generals, next to the scientists, next to this. And so every partnership I've done, like the one on this food, put 10 nutritionists in a room and they will have 40 opinions on exactly what this nutrition panel is. But to get them talking to the ag input people, these are tribes that have never talked together. And they talk in different ways, and they measure in different ways, and the goals are different. So to me, there's something about that collaborative table where you're willing to hear from everyone with a stake in that. And the book is very specific on this issue of top-down, bottom-up, this need to really connect into that. And I don't want to divert too much, but I just want to say one little example here. At the World Food Program, we were, I was struck that for 40 years we'd been providing food aid every year in northern Cameroon. And I said, what happens? They said, well, the same thing every year. Farmers harvest the food, someone comes by in a truck and tells them the price they'll get, they take the food, they keep some for the family, but then the rains come, there's no warehouses, there's no way to protect it, and then they're starving, and WFP comes in and feeds everyone for 4 months, and then, the harvests come back. And I was like, well, Einstein said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. And WFP was measuring its success by how many bags it outputted. I thought it should be the opposite. Like, how many people are no longer hungry on Earth? Like, how are we shutting down our business model, which was that dependency? And in the end, it ended up that we were able to trade food aid for a warehouse in each village to change that model, but the idea came from the villagers. When we said, how can we break this cycle? They said this, and I talk about this in a TED Talk, but it was an amazing thing. It was the women of the village that really unlocked it. So in Saudi Arabia, one thing that I've been working with is bringing in a very diverse group of people to help think through the elements that create success. Can you have a successful new city or old city without, creativity and art and culture and all of that? What makes for success? And you end up realizing, just as you did in New York, it's that multi-sectoral collaboration. So I think we need a whole new word for public-private partnerships, because it's not just about government and private sector. It's really about, the village coming together and creating a new future and modeling that.
Yes, please.
Just a
quickly.
quick comment, because that's such a good response. I think it's really important that for government to be in the center of a lot of these big public-private partnerships to ensure, and I know globally governments are corrupt and there are all of these problems, but government is the only place you can get broad-based legitimacy. So you don't have the problem of the philanthropy. I mean, it was so, your point was so great because it was so ridiculous, yet people conceive of them as a special interest in a way. And while governments are problematic, they are, at least in democratic societies, can bring legitimacy to a process. So, and also they can bring things to scale and have the capacity to raise greater amounts of resources. So to me, they need to be a strong partner, so improving the capacity of government is very important all over the globe. And I would say on the partnership issue, when you think about specific policies, it's important to think carefully about where best partnerships make sense. Because I am struck by an old American example from the Great Society, which was, during the war on poverty, there was something called maximum feasible participation, and this was after all of the low-income communities, black neighborhoods, were burning after riots, and the federal government finally decided to come in and partner with the local communities. And what struck me as extraordinary about this maximum feasible participation, they were asking poor people to come to the table to ensure that they could get basic services that in any suburb or wealthier community, they were guaranteed without spending their time, without spending an extra nickel, without spending anything. So I actually think there's a basic set of services that everybody should be entitled to and should get on the ground and not have to work hard for them, and that we should save our work for these partnerships where it makes sense and where we benefit from having the public engaged and where they get to feel that their time matters. Same thing for the business community, most of whom really don't like to talk to the agriculture people, right? And they don't like to talk to the not-for-profits, and they don't even like to talk to philanthropy. So we need to figure that out.
We'll call that the Ester Manifesto. So thank you. Yeah, and Josette as well. And I'm actually thrilled that Regina's here because it was exactly what you were speaking to around legitimacy and making sure that government efficiency is addressed as well. So we are horribly down to our last question.
Wow.
Oh
and
my God.
I feel so bad because we went from having no one lined up to now having dozens and dozens. And so I do apologize. We do trade mics off, so I apologize to this group over here, especially with my former students and others. So, but we will turn over to this side here. We'll ask our last lightning question, and then I'll wrap up at the end. So please.
Okay, thank you. Well, as students and future policymakers, I would like to ask you, what are the main bottlenecks or the main challenges that you found when working in this, like practically in these cross-sector partnerships that we can for sure take into account when we at a time are in the field of working collaboratively with different partners?
All right, so in lightning round fashion, let's see if we can do it. What is one top challenge you have come across categorically in working with partnerships? Who would like to start?
Money.
Money. Financing.
You know, I'm with Matthew Bishop. I believe you get the right 20 people in a room, you can tackle. We actually know a lot about how to solve big problems. And I am at so many tables right now, including in Haiti. And Strive Massi was a great philanthropist in Africa, unbelievable, organized the first business coalition to defeat Ebola there. I'm looking at one of his wonderful, amazing daughters here. Money at the table. We have people dedicated, willing to get it done. We have smart people. We have academia partnering now with humanitarians and people who are willing to risk their lives. And we've got business people who care. And you know, you need money. And so I think this next wave is about how do we get finance and tap the world of finance to really power up these great solutions.
Chapter 10, in case any of you are wondering, speaks explicitly to the financing issue and partnerships. Okay, we'll keep moving quickly. Major challenges, and then we're going to wrap up for the night.
Just quickly, I think when you do the partnerships, you really need the right partners, and you have to make sure that you're not wasting anybody's time. So there needs to be a lot of prep that goes into before you start convening and asking people, any person, whether it's a working, a low-income working person or a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, they need to know why they're there, what they can contribute, and how much time it's going to take them to do it. And most people do not want to engage if they can't see the end game.
Absolutely. Again, for those who have taken my class, I apologize, but you will know that the foundation, our family foundation, we call that a year zero, something we go back to in our class a lot, which is literally spending as much as a year doing the right planning, processing, and sequencing. You don't have that luxury in a lot of cases, particularly in examples like Josette's, but when you have the time and when you have the discipline to do it, it's critical. Okay, Regina.
Yes.
Please.
Maybe I think that there is an important point when you engage the different sectors to promote the same agenda, especially when you engage the private sector to improve the public services. You need to create the agenda is more important for citizens, not for interesting for the private sector. I think it's the very important point if you'd like to engage to have a partnership for the different sectors. To have the same agenda to focus on the citizens and to create the better service for citizens.
Fantastic. Chapter 12, by the way. No, I'm just kidding. Although we do cover that in chapter 12. Nonetheless, thank you so much for that. Matthew.
Yeah, I think I mean, there are many challenges, but I think one to focus on would be this sort of loyalty to your small tribe rather than a loyalty to a better outcome. And I think that so often, you know, the reason you do a partnership is because you want to be with someone that brings something different to you to the table. And I think so often people are held back by the fact that they are fundamentally more about the incentives of being in government, and they care more about what other people in government think about them, or they're in business and so they care more about what other business people think, and they're thinking more about their next job in another business or next job in another government. And so they aren't willing to break out of that silo and actually say, let's just get the job done. And because for me, the perfect embodiment of an effective partnership is the sort of posse that you see in the westerns when a town is under attack and the sheriff says, you know, everyone just stop what you're doing, let's get on the horses and ride out and sort this problem out, and then we'll go back to our day jobs afterwards. And everyone, once they're in that posse, they forget that they're in their individual, you know, professions and so forth, and they actually focus on the common goal. And I think so many of these partnerships are, you know, ultimately you go back to your narrow interests and don't embrace the broader interests.
Well, if you want Bill's view on this, you can read the book, of course. But I will say we have four of the smartest people that I know in the world who are up here on the stage. And not only did the issue of grand challenges come up over and over, from efficiency at the city level to humanitarian aid to what's going on in New York, all across the board. And I think you heard the same resonating sound come back over and over, which was that we all have to work in partnership and we have to do a better job working in partnership in order to overcome these significant challenges as well. So to me, it's wonderful to hear that kind of same theme echoing through, literally, everything that we've covered tonight, because I think it will be so important in the decades and potentially centuries ahead, again, to really solve some of the big challenges we just haven't been able to figure out yet, and potentially the ones that we haven't even considered. So now,
Howard, can I just say one thing?
Well, by all means.
I'm so sorry.
No.
I just want to say something because you all have gotten to know Howard Buffett. I've seen him on the front lines of the world, and one thing that's often missing is a profound respect and even love for the world and the people that people are working with. And when you bring that to the table, things change. This is a person who is fearless. He has been on the front lines. I've seen him jump out of helicopters. I've seen him go, you know, and whether it's Southern Sudan or Afghanistan or anywhere, he is there. And I just want to say that's a very big element that is intangible. But unless you come with complete respect to learn on the ground from what people know, the wisdom that is there, and take that and bring it to the world and connect it. And I think it's one of your greatest gifts. And I just want to say that because many of you may not have seen him in those contexts. I have. He's amazing. And I just had to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's not... Thank you very much. I appreciate that deeply. Well, sadly, we do have to bring the evening to a close. But before you go anywhere, a few things. First of all, the most sincerest of appreciation for our panelists. Again, yes, please. I'll reiterate what I said and just say we had an incredible diversity of perspectives up here. Background, countries of origin, places we've worked, sectors. And it just, again, it strikes me so strongly how that same resonating construct around the importance of partnerships is heard throughout this entire dialogue. So if you don't take anything else away from tonight, please remember that and how important that is. So that's one thing. And then on a more logistical point, first, we also have to say thanks to Bill's great generosity. For anyone in here who doesn't already have a copy of the book, we have a free copy waiting for you on the way out the door.
Wow.
There's a limited number, so please only take one. And please only take one if you don't already have one, because we know there's some students in here that may already have a copy. But nonetheless, that's available for you. And again, we really do want to extend our appreciation for making the time and the effort to come out tonight and to join us this evening. So thank you. With that, we will close.